Gender-based pay differentials are also substantial and persistent. In 2008, women earned approximately 80 cents for every dollar earned by men, and this figure represents an improvement from earlier decades. These pay gaps reflect both discrimination within high occupations and exclusion from higher paying occupations. Let's examine the reasons for lower pay for women. First, women work fewer hours per year on average than men. This is partly because women are more likely to work part-time and partly because they're more likely to take time off for family responsibilities. However, significant pay gaps exist even when comparing full-time year-round workers. Second, education and job experience matters. Historically, women had less formal education than men on average, though this has now been reversed. Women earn more college and graduate degrees than men. However, women are more likely to have interrupted career trajectories, taking time off for child rearing, which means less continuous work experience. These interruptions can significantly affect lifetime earnings. Third, direct gender discrimination still exists. Research using audit structures, studies, sending matched pairs of resumes that differ only in the applicant's gender consistently find that female applicants receive fewer callbacks and lower salary offers than identical male applicants, especially for higher level positions. Fourth, and perhaps more important, gender-based occupational segregation means that women are concentrated in lower paying occupations. Even when education and skill requirements are similar, traditional female occupations pay less than traditionally male occupations. We'll examine this phenomenon in more detail shortly. Let's dig deeper into why traditional female occupations pay less. One economic explanation involves supply and demand. If many women are seeking jobs in a limited number of occupations because of segregation, discrimination, or preferences, the large supply of workers relative to demand will drive wages down in these occupations. However, there's more to the story than simply supply and demand. There's also what sociologists call the devaluation of women's work. Work that is associated with women is literally valued less by society. It is seen as less skilled, less important, and less difficult. This happens even when objective analysis suggests that the work requires similar levels of education, responsibility, and skill as male-dominated occupations. For example, why should an elementary school teacher earn significantly less than a systems analyst when both require college degrees and specialized knowledge? Part of the answer is teaching young children is associated with mothering, something women are assumed to do naturally, and therefore it is not valued as a professional skill. Now let's address career continuity. Women do have more breaks in their career trajectories than men, primarily related to childbearing and child rearing. Here's what's crucial. These breaks come at a critical point in career development. Having children typically happens in one's late 20s and 30s, exactly when men are putting in the long hours and making career moves that lead to advancement into senior positions. Taking even a few years off during this critical period can permanently derail career advancement. But here is what often is overlooked. Motherhood entails sacrifices, even for women who don't take time off work. They may be working full time, but declining promotions that would require relocation, turning down projects that would require extensive travel, or leaving work on time to handle childcare, all of which can affect their career trajectories relative to male colleagues who have partners handling these responsibilities. Understanding workplace inequality requires examining the intersection of race and gender. We can't just look at race or gender in isolation. The experiences of African American women, Latino women, Asian women, and white women differ in important ways. On average, African American and Latino women earn less than white women. This represents a double disadvantage. They face both gender and racial discrimination. However, there's fascinating reversal when we look at college-educated women. African American women with college degrees actually earn slightly more than white women with college degrees. How can we explain this? Well, several factors are at work. First, African American with college degrees tend to have longer, more continuous careers than white women with similar education. They are less likely to take extended time off for child rearing, partly because of economic necessity. Their families are more likely to need two incomes, and partly because of culture patterns where African American women work have historically combined work and motherhood. These longer careers mean more experience and seniority, leading to higher earnings. Secondly, there may actually be less discrimination against African American women in professional settings than against African American men. This is a very controversial claim, but some research suggests that black women in white-collar professional environments face fewer stereotypes about being threatening or difficult to manage than black men do. Third, college-educated African American women may be benefiting from diversity initiatives and affirmative actions in ways that haven't extended as effectively to African American men or to less educated African American women. However, we should not overstate this. Even when African American women with degrees earn more than white women with degrees, both groups earn significantly less than white men with degrees. Let's sum up what we know about gender wage gaps. First, women earn on average 80 cents on the dollar less than men. Okay. Second, over the long term, from the 70s to now, the male-female earning gap has narrowed. While this sounds like progress, there's a troubling reality. The narrowing has occurred largely because men's real wages have declined rather than because women's wages have increased substantially. Deindustrialization, declining union membership, and globalization have hit male-dominated manufacturing jobs hard. So the gap is closed somewhat, but not primarily because women are doing better. It's partly because men are doing worse. That's not really the kind of progress we want to celebrate. The picture for college-educated women is complex and troubling. On one hand, women with college degrees have seen improved pay relative to less educated women. The college wage premium has increased for women as for men. College-educated women also have made inroads into previously male-dominated professions, law, medicine, and business. However, the male-female earning gap among college-educated workers has increased in recent years. College-educated men have pulled further ahead of college-educated women in terms of earnings. Why? Because part of it is occupational segregation, even within professions. Female lawyers are more likely to work in lower paying specialties and less likely to make partner. Part of it is the time demands of high paying professional careers that are difficult to combine with primary responsibility for childcare. And part of it is ongoing discrimination and exclusion from the network and opportunities that lead to the highest paying positions. The glass ceiling remains very real for college educated women. Let's shift our focus to how workers advance in their careers. The primary mechanism for getting ahead is promotion, moving up to positions with more responsibility, authority, and pay. But how should promotions be determined? This is a fundamental question in workplace organization, and there are two basic approaches: seniority and merit. Seniority-based promotion is straightforward and unambiguous. Whoever has been with the organization the longest gets promoted first. Seniority systems often dictate not just promotion, but also wages, salaries, and desirable shift assignments, and protection against layoffs. These systems are common in unionized workplaces and often written into labor contracts. What are the advantages of seniority systems? First, they're objective and transparent. Everyone knows where they stand. There's no subjectivity or favoritism. Second, they reward loyalty and experience. Workers who stick with an organization are rewarded for their commitment. Third, and very important for our discussion of diversity, seniority systems help prevent prejudiced decision. If promotion is automatic based on time with the company, a racist or sexist supervisor cannot deny someone a promotion because of their race or gender. This objectivity has made seniority systems attractive to workers and unions seeking to protect members from discrimination. However, seniority systems also have drawbacks. They can promote mediocre workers while bypassing talent newcomers. They can reduce motivation. Why work hard at all if time served is all that matters? As we'll see on the next slide, they can actually disadvantage women and minorities in certain circumstances. Merit-based promotion has obvious appeal. Shouldn't the best performer be rewarded and promoted? Well, this system appeals to our sense of fairness and meritocracy, and employers use merit systems as motivational tools, encouraging workers to perform well in hopes of advancement. However, merit systems are far more ambiguous and problematic than they might appear. The fundamental question is, how do you define merit? For some jobs, performance can be measured objectively. Sales figures, production, output, error rates. But for many occupations, especially white-collar and professional positions, performance is difficult to measure objectively. How do you evaluate the merit of a manager, a teacher, or a social worker? Most occupations have multiple work tasks and components. A good teacher might be excellent at explaining concepts but weak at classroom management, or vice versa. An effective manager might be great at motivating employees but poor at budgeting. So which aspect of the performance should count more in determining merit? Different evaluators might weigh these factors differently. Furthermore, most jobs are collective in nature. Success depends on teamwork and collaboration. How do you isolate an individual's contribution to a group project? If a team completes a project successfully, who deserves credit? The person who had the original idea, the person who did most of the work, the person who smoothed over conflicts and kept the team functioning. These ambiguities in defining and measuring merit create opportunities for subjective judgments and therefore for bias and discrimination to enter the promotion process. Both seniority and merit systems, despite their different logics, can create problems for women and minorities. So let's start with seniority. While seniority systems prevent some form of discrimination by being objective, they reward stable, continuous employment, and this works to the advantage of white men. Why? Because white men have historically had fewer interruptions in their careers. Women are more likely to take time off for childbearing and child rearing, which resets their seniority. Minority workers, especially in earlier decades, were more likely to experience unemployment or to have been excluded from certain industries altogether until recently, giving them less opportunity to accumulate seniority. So seniority systems can actually perpetuate historical inequalities even while preventing current discrimination. Now let's look at pitfalls of merit-based systems. As we just discussed, defining and measuring merit is inherently subjective. This subjectivity creates opportunities for bias. Evaluators may unconsciously or consciously favor people who are like them or who fit their stereotype of what a good worker or leader looks like. Cooperation and teamwork are crucial in modern workplaces, but this creates its own problems. Research by sociologist Rosabeth Moss-Cantor introduced the concept of homosocial reproduction, the tendency for managers to prefer, mentor, and promote people whom are similar to themselves. Why? Because trust and smooth communication are easier with people from similar backgrounds who share your cultural references and communication styles. A white male manager may feel more comfortable and more confident in a white male subordinate than a woman or minority worker, even if the objective performance is identical. This isn't necessarily a conscious prejudice. It's often an unconscious preference for people who seem familiar and comfortable. But the effect is that women and minorities face barriers to advancement because they don't fit the template of what leaders have historically looked like. Given all these barriers and forms of discrimination we've discussed, what has been done to address them? Well, the major legal watershed was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, particularly Title VII, which prohibited employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Before this federal legislation, restraints on discrimination were confined to state and local laws, which varied widely in their coverage and enforcement. The Civil Rights Act created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce these protections and gave workers legal recourse when discriminated against. However, simply making discrimination illegal did not transform the workplace overnight. Overt discrimination became less common, but subtle forms persist. Historical inequalities in education, wealth, social networks, and job experience continue to affect employment outcomes even after discrimination was prohibited. This led to the development of affirmative action policies. The justification for affirmative action is straightforward. Centuries of discrimination have produced serious inequalities in employment, education, and economic outcomes. These inequalities won't simply disappear on their own, even if we stop discriminating now. Active measures are needed to address the legacy of past discrimination and to ensure that women and minorities have genuine equal opportunity. Affirmative action recognizes that we can't achieve equality just by making discrimination illegal and then pretending we're starting from a level playing field. The playing field isn't level, it's tilted by history. And the affirmative action is or was an attempt to level it. However, it has been controversial from the beginning, and it continues to remain so. The controversies around affirmative action largely stem from different interpretation of what it should involve. So let's look at three main approaches. The first and most modest interpretation is that affirmative action should create fairer chances in applying for educational opportunities and jobs. This means actively recruiting women and minority candidates, ensuring that job postings reach diverse audiences, and removing barriers in the application process. For example, if most jobs are filled through personal networks that exclude minorities, affirmative action might require publicly posting job opportunities so everyone has a chance to apply. This approach doesn't guarantee outcomes. It just tries to ensure that the pool of applicants is diverse. This is sometimes called affirmative action as equal opportunity. The second, more aggressive interpretation holds that simply widening the applicant pool isn't enough. If women and minorities face ongoing discrimination in hiring and promotion, then having diverse application pools will not solve the problem. According to this view, affirmative action requires quotas or goals to actually ensure women and minorities are hired and promoted at certain rates. This might mean saying if qualified minority applicants are available, they must constitute at least X% of new hires. This is much more controversial because it comes closer to guaranteeing outcomes rather than just opportunities. Critics call this reverse discrimination and argue it's unfair to white men who might be passed over even if they are equally or better qualified. Supporters counter that without strong measures like quotas, discrimination will continue and inequality will persist. It's worth noting that most affirmative action programs specifically prohibit rigid quotas and instead use goals or targets that organizations are expected to work toward. The third approach to affirmative action is somewhere between the first two. It agrees with the second approach that widening the applicant pool won't solve the problem, but instead for calling for quotas, it emphasizes target education and training programs. The logic here is that many minorities lack access to quality education and job training due to historical inequalities. Simply opening doors will not help if people don't have the skills and credentials to walk through them. This approach might involve scholarship programs for minority students, internship programs that provide work experience, mentoring programs that help people navigate career paths, or pre-apprenticeship programs that prepare people for skilled trades. The advantage of this approach is that it builds human capital rather than just redistributing opportunities. It helps people develop skills and qualifications rather than placing them in positions they might not be prepared for. Critics argue that this approach, while valuable, doesn't address ongoing discrimination in hiring and promotion and may take too long to produce results. Supporters argue it's more politically palatable and sustainable than quotas, and it addresses root causes rather than just symptoms. The slide ends with an important acknowledgement. The history of inequalities based on race, ethnicity, and gender spans centuries. It's unrealistic to expect these deep-seated patterns to be remedied in a few years or even a few decades. Achieving genuine equality will require a sustained effort over a long period, and there will be setbacks along the way. This doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we need realistic expectations and patience while maintaining pressure for continued progress. Let's turn to another legal remedy that's been proposed but has gained less traction: comparable worth policies. The basic idea between comparable worth is that gender-based occupational segregation should not result in unequal pay for women and men. Here's the key insight. Even though two jobs might be very different in their specific task, one male-dominated, one female-dominated, they might be fundamentally similar in terms of skills, knowledge, and responsibilities they require. Comparable worth advocates argue that jobs should be evaluated based on objective criteria like the amount of training required, the level of job-related experience needed, the mental and physical stress involved, and the level of workplace responsibility. These factors can be scored and compared across different occupations. For example, let's compare an electrician, a male-dominated trade, and a dental hygienist, a female-dominated occupation. Both require technical training and certification. Both involve detailed, precise work with potential consequences for mistakes. Both involve some physical stress and demanding work conditions. Yet, electricians typically earn significantly more than dental hygienists. Comparable worth advocates would argue this pay gap isn't justified by objective differences in job requirements. It reflects gender discrimination and the devaluation of women's work. Under a comparable worth system, jobs with similar total scores would receive similar pay, regardless of whether they're male or female dominated. This would dramatically reduce the wage gap attributed to occupational segregation. Despite the logical appeal, comparable worth has gained very little traction in the U.S. There have been proposals at state and local levels, and a few jurisdictions have implemented comparable worth systems for public employees. But nationally, comparable worth faces formidable political and economic barriers. The primary political obstacle is that comparable worth appears to contradict free market principles. Opponents argue that wages and salaries should be determined by market forces, supply and demand, not by bureaucratic job evaluation systems. They claim that if electricians earn more than dental hygienists, it's because there's more demand for electricians or less supply, and any attempt to administratively set wages will create economic distortions. However, comparable worth advocates counter that markets are already not the sole or even primary determination of wages and salaries. Union contracts, minimum wage laws, and internal corporate pay scales all involve non-market wage setting mechanisms. The astronomical salaries of CEOs in recent decades hasn't been determined by pure market forces. So why is it acceptable for these administrative systems to set wages, but not a comparable worth system designed to reduce gender inequality? Beyond the political opposition, there are genuine practical difficulties in implementing comparable worth. Selecting the criteria for job evaluation is contentious. Should physical strength count as much as education? How do you compare mental stress in different contexts? Different stakeholders will have different views on what factors should be weighed most heavily, and evaluating every job in an organization or economy using these criteria would be an enormous administrative undertaking. The practical difficulties, combined with political opposition, mean that comparable worth remains more of a theoretical possibility than a reality in American workplaces, though it has been more successfully implemented in some other countries. As we conclude this chapter on diversity in the workplace, let's reflect on the key themes we've covered. First, while overt discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and gender has decreased dramatically since the civil rights era, significant inequalities persist. The inequalities are maintained through more subtle mechanisms, spatial mismatch, and lack of access to job networks for minority workers, occupational segregation by gender, subjective judgments in hiring, and promotion that favors those from advantaged groups, and the devaluation of work associated with women and minorities. Secondly, explaining these inequalities isn't simple. Biological arguments, human capital theory, and socialization explanations all contain some insights but are insufficient. The reality involves complex interactions between historical discrimination, ongoing bias, structural barriers, and individual choices made within constrained circumstances. Third, legal remedies like civil rights legislation and affirmative action have made important progress but face significant political opposition and practical limitations. Creating genuinely equal opportunity requires not just eliminating current discrimination, but actively addressing the legacy of past discrimination, and there is no consensus on how aggressive these remedial efforts should be. Fourth, pay gaps between groups, whether based on race, ethnicity, or gender, result from multiple factors: discrimination, occupational segregation, differences in education and experience, career interruptions, and the devalue of work associated with disadvantaged groups. Closing these gaps requires addressing all of these factors, not just one. Finally, issues of diversity and equality in the workplace are deeply connected to broader social institutions, particularly family and education. Women's career trajectories are profoundly affected by their disproportionate responsibility for childcare and housework, something we'll talk about in the next chapter. Minority workers' employment prospects are shaped by inequalities and educational opportunities that begin in childhood. As you think about these issues, consider what would genuine equal opportunity look like? Is it enough to simply prohibit discrimination, or do we need active measures to address historical inequalities? How can we balance concerns about fairness to individuals with the need to address group level inequalities? And how do your own identities, your race, ethnicity, gender, class, background, shape the opportunities and barriers you face or will face in the labor market? These aren't easy questions, and reasonable people disagree about the answers. But grappling with them is essential for understanding the modern workplace and working toward greater equality. In our next chapter, we'll examine how work and family life intersect, a topic that's particularly crucial for understanding women's experience in the workforce.